Joe Budden calls out Flip for walking all over him and doing whatever he wants on the podcast. On Patreon, the episode called Those Stuffs, Joe Budden aired Flip out, but he also laid the groundwork for his exit from the Joe Budden podcast, and you need to see how. So this episode was a fascinating deep dive into where Joe Budden and Flip currently find themselves. Flip just launched Improper Improv, though it was a really rocky start, and Joe Budden is trying to right the ship as he heads into the depths of fourth quarter. Well, this episode starts with Joe Budden kind of wrestling with Flip and then calling him out for being on his phone all the time. If you haven't noticed, Flip seems to be on his phone more and more now, and I always say that's an indication of somebody who's becoming disengaged from the show. Remember Maul? Then Flip does something really crazy and says, "Why don't you call out Ish for the same behavior?" And I must say, Ish looks really pissed off with Flip highlighting that, so much so that he viciously shakes his head and looks disgusted at Flip. Joe then gets into his manipulator bag and puts Flip in the spin cycle, highlighting how he has promoted Flip on posters all over the city for Improper Improv. And Joe says Flip is still walking all over him with his behaviors on the show. He's talking about things like Flip being late, being on his phone, leaving early, disrespecting his co-host, along with ruining the morale of the show with his antics. Now, a lot of people might say this is jokes, but a joke is different when it's rooted in reality. Flip is actually coming late to the show. He's always on his phone. He's leaving early. And he did disrespect Melissa Ford on the recent taping of the Joe Budden podcast, so much so that she would walk off set. So even though this is a joke, these are tangible things that would get you fired in most jobs. And it's entertainment business where this is more allowed, but it still can get you fired because one day Joe can wake up and say, "I don't like how unprofessional Flip is. I would prefer if he leaves the show." Flip then says Joe is dealing with him different as a result of his fallout with Rory and Maul. And now he is letting Flip get away with a lot of stuff so he can easily get rid of him when the time comes. Now, this is a good observation by Flip. I truly think if Joe Budden never had the Rory and Maul situation, he would be dealing with his cast very differently, because the optics would look crazy for him to fall out with Ish or fall out with Flip. So now he tries to look like the understanding boss, but deep down inside, he's seething, he's upset at the lack of professionalism and the way they treat a big podcast that is probably only second to the Breakfast Club in terms of impact within the field of urban media. And they've also broken outside of urban media. Joe then hits super manipulation mode by saying that him and Flip can never be on bad terms, because when they were actually about to fight and Flip was suspended, Flip did not go to the public with what was happening behind the scenes.
He said, if you want to fight, whatever you want to do, we could do it right now. And da 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 da. I said, so what's up then, nigga? But his tone was more higher than mine at the time. Like his it was more deeper. 10 minutes passed. I had to analyze. I was quiet on my phone. I was recording. That's what I was doing. We were separated far from each other, but it was talking. So what happens is like Joe's voice is powerful, and certain things. I was going to the story about on the balcony when we had our meeting, because we had our meeting Monday. I went back Tuesday. I was supposed to come back in July. We had our meeting and we were just arguing, man. Like I'm talking about the neighbors was looking outside, like they were looking outside, record like the neighbors, like we were loud using the F word and I'm like,
Yeah, I remember y'all talking about that
yeah,
briefly. Yeah.
like I like trying to play with my family, but you got to throw like that in there to see how neighbors care. Like, 10 minutes passed. He said, "Yo, when the last time you got into a fight?" I said, "Right now."
Now, what Joe Budden is doing here is he's laying the groundwork for how he wants Flip to leave the network. He doesn't want the public blowout that happened with Rory and Maul. Rory and Maul left Joe Budden with scars that would last for the rest of his life in the media. I mean, everybody thinks he's a thief now. Everybody thinks he manipulated them and stole from them just because of that situation. And he doesn't want Flip to go that route when he leaves the show. So this is a smart move by Joe. Joe then says he doesn't care about Flip's shenanigans and think they will be cool no matter what happens in the future. Joe deep down knows that Flip isn't sustainable on the network. Flip even knows that he probably doesn't want to be there long term. So what you're seeing here is a negotiation between the two through the guise of male friendship. You know, laughing, recounting stories that are rooted in reality and jokes. You are seeing the end of a dynamic take place. And I truly believe that they're openly negotiating because they want to be careful about how each other looks in the breakup. Because of the Rory and Mal situation, Joe can't look too crazy. And because of Joe Budden's audience, you know, Joe Budden has an audience that will switch on somebody really quick. I mean, they will demonize whoever leaves the show. It's kind of like a cultish fan base. Not everybody, but a lot of them. Like you saw when Rory and Mal left, there was like a legion of fans just going on their comments, calling their podcast boring, calling them irrelevant, even though they still had a pretty notable accomplishment of launching their podcast. So Flip doesn't want that energy, and also he's tied to these street code things that he applies to content creation, which I think is weird sometimes, but Joe Budden is playing into that with this type of manipulation that he did on this episode of the Patreon. Now, I want to talk about a book I read that ties to this situation. It's called Sex, Money, Murder, written by Jonathan Green, and it's one of the most preeminent sources of gang culture that you can read, and it's about the gang Sex, Money, Murder that dominated the Bronx River housing projects. And one of the most interesting parts of the book to me was there was a member of the gang that was shot, right? And when he was shot, the leader of the gang was like, nah, we're gonna hold it down. They don't violate you. We're gonna make sure that we always take care of our people over here. And what the writer highlighted was how the leader of the gang wasn't necessarily caring about the person he was shot. He was simply buttering him up so he could do what he ultimately wanted him to do, which was get revenge and also lead to him gaining power, because the revenge he would get would make his gang look even more invincible. And I know this is just podcasting. What Joe is doing here is buttering up Flip, letting him know this is how I want this to go. When you do leave, make sure you leave in a way that doesn't hurt my network, and make sure you remember all of the favors I did for you. I let you leave early. I made improper improv posters. You disrespected members of my cast. So make sure when you walk out that door, you do it with your head held high for you and for my sake. But let me know what you think. This episode is called Those Stuffs on Patreon, and it really happens within the first 15 minutes. And I was watching and I was like, I got to do a video about this because this is what Joe wants to happen. Who knows if that will actually happen? I know, right? Flip says that he's going to hold it down. Joe says that he wants him to hold it down, but things can go left. And there's always going to be channels like this one that will try to see what actually happened when Flip inevitably leaves the Joe Budden Network. All right, y'all. That's my video for today. Follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. I got more videos coming, and there's a lot happening with this podcast, and I think we really, really need to stay tuned. Everybody get your science instruments ready. We're gonna be doing the science a lot over the next few months. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.